Hello, and welcome to Tomversations, a monthly conversation with me, your host, Tom Hollingsworth, on a variety of technical topics. This month, I'd like to dig a little bit into networking, cloud, and security and talk to you about the latest set of buzzwords coming out of everyone's favorite analyst firm, talking about security and the edge. That's right, we're not just going SASE, we're going sissy? Let's have a conversation about that. All right, so before we dig into today's topic in depth, we need to do some definition. And I hope that you have your little alphabet magnets that go on the refrigerator handy, because we're going to be going through a lot of acronyms very quickly. So we need to start with the original overarching acronym that makes all of this possible. That would be SDN, Software Defined Networking. Now, we've been dealing with SDN for almost a decade at this point, if not longer, talking about the ways that software is driving the decisions that are being made in networking hardware, in the way that it is deployed, and a lot of other things. And so SDN for a long time was kind of this nebulous idea that maybe involved a little programmatic network orchestration and automation and some, applications running on top of the switch, and it was really confusing. And for a long time, it was essentially just SDN as OpenFlow. Until someone actually came out with a really good definition of what SDN could be, and that was with software-defined wide area networking, or SD-WAN. Now, for those of you who have probably been living under a rock or behind a T1 line for the last several years, SD-WAN is effectively taking an Edge Connect device, which is not a router, historically as we would think of one, but instead a commodity CPU appliance running an operating system that makes the interconnection between WAN edges much easier. So depending on how far back you go, your idea of WAN interconnect could involve things like T1 lines, advanced serial connections, or some other very complicated media types. Fast forward to the 2010s, and almost everything is an Ethernet handoff now. You probably have never configured any kind of ADSL line or had to configure a dial map interface. And that means that a lot of the things that we've been using for a number of years to kind of provide reliability on these circuits kind of went away too. MPLS, which is Multiprotocol label switching, is a very common service being offered by telco providers to give you reliability on a circuit. And the cost trade-off is that while it's reliable, it's usually a lot slower than a broadband connection that you could have. So where SDN and SD-WAN kind of started playing in this market was by providing low-cost interconnectivity that provided reliability and a bunch of other things on top of that through the use of software. So you could have things like policy-based routing that utilized diverse circuit types. You had application inspection that allowed you to effectively do QoS without needing to know the ugly innards of how it actually worked with marking. You could just optimize, say, Microsoft Office Online traffic or cloud-based traffic without necessarily needing to get in there and kind of tweak DSCP settings and things like that. And because they were all kind of unified appliances that had a similar policy set, they were easy to manage in one big dashboard. Now, you've probably heard of a lot of SD-WAN vendors that started out in the market, folks like CloudGenix, Viptela, VeloCloud, Versa Networks. All of these vendors, with a couple of exceptions, had to develop their own technology, and then by and large were eventually purchased by the incumbents in the technology space like Cisco, VMware, Palo Alto Networks. What happened? Where did everything go from SD-WAN? Well, it turns out that when you're starting to do cloud access and things like that, you needed a little bit more oomph. You need a little bit more software running behind the scenes. And that's when our friends over at Gartner got involved and created an entirely new category of SD-WAN, because now it wasn't just about doing the connectivity piece. You needed to provide more services on top of that. And so SD-WAN transformed into a new category called Secure Access Service Edge, or SASE, which has colloquially been referred to as SASE. Now, if the term SASE sounds familiar to you as a listener of Tomversations, you may recall that all the way back in episode 1, I referred to the fact that SASE to me really felt like Unified Threat Management 2.0. It's been a couple of years since I've recorded that video, and I would honestly say that my perspective has changed a little bit, and I'll tell you why. It's because rather than having the software stack be kind of this nebulous idea of what we think things should be, it has effectively been codified. Now it is pretty standard as to what a SASE solution needs to include. And there are 5 things that it does need to have. So the first of these is obviously SD-WAN. You need to have some kind of connectivity between sites, and you need to have some way of providing access for your users to get where they're going. That's a given if we're talking about this solution set. The second is Zero Trust Network Architecture, or ZTNA. This is the security policy that isolates users from accessing resources that they're not supposed to be able to see, and effectively provides a challenge mechanism for your users to justify their access to the network. Zero Trust Network Architecture is something that's been getting a lot of press lately because it's being seen as a solution to problems such as ransomware and the increasing malware threat. Because if you isolate what a user is capable of accessing, you also isolate their ability, or any one system's ability, to overrun your entire network. ZTNA is considered a core part of SASE. Next is Secure Web Gateway, or SWG. Now, what is this? Secure Web Gateway is the system that sits in place that allows a company to verify web requests and verify that your DNS requests are valid. Depending on how far back you go or where your technology background started, this sounds an awful lot like a web filter, and you would be absolutely right. This is essentially a web proxy. So you connect through your device through a secure web gateway to go places on the internet. Sounds simple, right? Well, the company in charge of the secure web gateway, or in charge of giving you the policy, can do things like denying you the ability to go to questionable sites. They can ensure that you are not going to places that could cause your machine to get infected. They can do a lot of other things. And that way they can, kind of put a fair use or acceptable use policy into place that, conserves their resources. It's a great way to keep bandwidth from spiraling out of control. After that is firewall as a service. This could be known as next generation firewall, depending on who is selling you the product. So firewalling as a service effectively is traffic control, right? We can decide which services are allowed to go out, which services are allowed to do certain things, how they are optimized, and those kinds of things. That one's pretty simple. Just sticking as a service on the end of it really doesn't do anything. It's still the same firewall that you're probably used to, just a little flashier. The last is the Cloud Access Security Broker, or the CASB, which is a software piece that allows users to access data on different clouds or through different applications that leverage different clouds without the need to constantly log in and out or change your VPN connection or something like that. CASB has been considered one of the foundational pieces of SASE and many other technologies for a number of years. And there's been a lot of companies who have been very, forward-looking in the way that they build those solutions. All right, so those are the 5 big things you need to have. You need to have SD-WAN, you need to have Zero Trust Network Architecture, Secure Web Gateway, CASB, and Firewall as a Service. All right, that sounds pretty easy to figure out, right? All right, so we've gone through all of those acronyms, so now here's our new one, SSE. And we're not going to call it SSE because that's stupid. But what is SSE? Well, let's take a look at that. It's SASE without the A. Sorry, spoiler alert. No, really, when you look at what SSE is, and when you compare it to what SASE has been defined as, it literally is those 5 things minus the part where you add SD-WAN. Really, it is. So think about the fact that we went from SD-WAN, which was a software-driven WAN connectivity model. And the analyst firms said, no, we need more. We need something that will allow us to access the cloud and be more effective in the way that we do things. And so there are a lot of people who stepped up to build that solution. Now, here's where it gets interesting. because a lot of the people who stepped up to build that solution were not necessarily people who had expertise in all of those other areas. So while you had the Viptelas and the VeloClouds and the CloudGenixes of the world who were very good at the hardware part, their software stacks were optimized for site-to-site connectivity and application acceleration, and not for the security pieces, the CASBs and the zero trust network architectures and those kinds of things. So in order to be able to build those, they had to partner with existing companies that did those really well. Companies like BitGlass or Zscaler. Fast forward to today, where we have SSE. What if we did the security pieces without providing the WAN connectivity part? Well, the WAN connectivity part, with the exception of companies like Versa Networks and some other service-oriented providers like Ariaka, have effectively gone away. They've been subsumed into larger companies. So what's left is you've got these larger companies that are either trying to develop their own security suites, or they're trying to partner with other companies that are doing things, and the companies that have historically done really great jobs in these areas are being picked up by other providers. A prime example of this is BitGlass. They have been purchased by ForcePoint. So what Gartner effectively did was, well, what if we did another Magic Quadrant that had all of the people who are really good at the SSE part of SASE, but don't build their own hardware? And voila, a Magic Quadrant is born. So when you look at the current release of who the leaders are in that space, you get companies like Zscaler, you get companies like Netscope, Palo Alto Networks, and BitGlass. You also have companies like Cisco and Versa Networks and ForcePoint and, a few others. So what does that effectively mean for this discussion? Because you're probably sitting here scratching your head going, so it's SASE, just no hardware? Yeah, basically that's it. So SSE is effectively SASE, but as a service. Yeah, I'm scratching my head too. Because here's what the driver in this market is going to be. If a company is good at delivering that hardware already, like Versa Networks or Palo Alto Networks, they're going to continue to sell you the hardware. They're going to tell you about the importance of having on-premises equipment running these services locally. You're going to run into some of the same challenges that you've seen in the past, where the questions still arise about whether or not these services can scale at the level that you need for your users. But the challenge now is not, can your remote branch office scale to the number of users that are in it? Because as we've all found out over the last couple of years, the remote branch office in most cases is now an office of one at somebody's house. And so I'm not as focused on shipping my users the equipment that they need. I'm focused on delivering the services that they have to have in order to do their job, which means I need to be able to do these services on anything, or I need to deliver a software application that provides connectivity to those services. That's interesting. Decoupling the software from the hardware allows me to provide an entirely different suite of services to a mobile device, to a laptop, to a remote knowledge worker, without the need to ship them admittedly inexpensive hardware, but that bill still goes up significantly when I have to ship 10,000 employees a $200 firewall. Whereas if I had 10,000 employees at $4 a user per month, that is an operational cost instead of a capital expenditure. And now you're starting to get the picture. By creating a market segment that is focused on SASE without the hardware, I can now start offering it as a subscription service that has no upfront expenditure, which will make a lot of people very, very happy because it's just a line item that they tick. And the companies that are providing these kinds of connectivity are the ones that you've been relying on all the time anyway. I talk about ForcePoint and BitGlass because they are kind of like the first name in CASB. firewall as a service and secure web gateway. There's been a lot of companies that have been leveraged by a lot of different providers over the years. And it's to the point now where the companies who have historically been delivering SD-WAN and SASE connectivity are starting to develop their own solutions, because we're starting to see consolidation in the market where those companies are going out and being purchased for their market position. And you don't want to be the last person left without a chair when the musical purchase acquisition chain, the music stops playing. So where does that leave us? Well, now that we've run out of alphabet soup for our refrigerator with all of the acronyms that we've defined today, you have to ask yourself this question. What is the most important part of the solution to you? Is it the interconnectivity in the hardware? Is it the access part that allows you to accelerate local access or create an always-on VPN back to your headquarters? Or is it your users and their security posture? Because the thing is that you're going to get that if you go with SASE or if you go with SSE. SD-WAN is just a connectivity type. It's no different than buying a router with a serial line in it now. Sure, there's some little nice to haves that are on top of it that are very much focused on the networking side of the house. But this conversation has evolved from being just about networking and interconnectivity to being about security and platform. So with SASE, you're buying it as essentially all-in-one appliance. You're getting a box with a management suite that does a whole bunch of stuff for you that you need to deliver a box or some kind of very heavy client to people. And there's a cost associated with that. With SSE, what you're getting is a security suite of software only that is being delivered to someone else's box potentially, or being delivered directly to the end user through the use, again, of a client, maybe not as heavy as the one before. You still get all the same advantages that you would normally have, which is a unified architecture for being able to define policy and audit users to ensure that they're doing the things that they're supposed to do. And the question just becomes, who are you going to trust to do that? Are you going to trust your incumbent SD-WAN SASE provider? Are you going to entrust it to the secure services edge people who have been providing a lot of that functionality on the back end, maybe as a white label type service, but now they're stepping to the forefront because you're getting into the areas where they're a lot more common? Or do you trust someone who really does have kind of a hybrid approach? Well, that's up to you. You have to decide what's most important to you and how you want to handle the situation. Don't be confused by the dearth of acronyms that are out there. In fact, here's the easiest way to think about it. SD-WAN is networking. SASE is networking and security. SSE is a subset of SASE that includes security but no access. So when you go into these conversations with people and you're ready to try to figure out what you want to do, now you're going to be forewarned and forearmed. And you can always check out the show notes for this episode to learn a little bit more about how each of the different providers of these solutions see each of them just a little bit differently. Thank you very much for tuning in for this episode of Tomversations. I had a little bit of fun trying to figure out all the differences in these acronyms. And as you could probably tell, they're similar enough that you can probably figure them out with a little bit of research. But, being able to explain it fairly quickly, hopefully to a group of people out there who are doing a little bit of research, really helps as well. Each of these episodes comes out roughly every month on a different technical topic of interest to me. I love having these technical conversations with my community every month because it gives me the opportunity to explore new technologies and see trends that are happening. And if there is a subject that you think is interesting that you'd like to have a Tomversation about, make sure that you tweet at me. I'm at Networking Nerd on Twitter, and just use the hashtag Tomversations, and we can work that into an episode and see where it goes from there. You can always find every episode of Tomversations, including the associated show notes, on our website at gestaltit.com. We hope that these are informative and fun for you. We'll be back next month with another great episode, and I can't wait to talk to you then.